Hey, Anitha. Good morning. It's a little bit early on your side. So where are you at? Just to give everybody context.
Yeah, hi. Hey, great. Good morning, KP. I'm in right now Palo Alto in the Bay Area. And yeah, it is about 7 a.m. So it's a little nudge to we're gonna wake up, but bright and early. It's great.
So as people start kind of piling into the room, it was funny. I was on a call this morning with Singapore, and they said it was funny. The woman was Australian, and she said in her wonderful Australian accent, "Everyone's in the lobby. They're starting to pile in," and I thought that was funny in a virtual sense. The whole idea. She called it a lobby and all that. Um, so as people are kind of coming in through the lobby, um, give us a little bit of background, because we've known each other for a long time. We both travel nonstop. I know last year we tracked it. I was about 160 days on the road, which is not trivial. I think you're the only person I know that probably travels more than I do, and we're all
The curve.
we're adjusting a little bit to this idea of not going to the airport and not being on a plane and being home. So how is it at a personal level? How has been being home and being somewhat grounded and kind of forced to have a routine been for you?
You know, it actually, in a way, I'm liking it. The fact that you're always on the go, 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 like living out of a suitcase, shuttling between airport to airport, while that process has become very mechanical, especially when you travel a lot, you just don't think about it, you just go with the flow. But just the fact that you're not going anywhere, you're not getting dressed, you're not like driving, like no wait times, no TSA lines. I'm really liking it. And I'm right now, the last I was in Bombay, like literally right before the lockdown happened. So I got back on the 12th, and I've literally been in the self quarantine mode ever since. It's kind of like my 20th day or something. Like wherein like you're kind of in isolation, you're like in this lockdown mode, and you're only stepping out just to kind of get your groceries and nothing else, like zero human other interaction on a personal level, but zero routine. I think I still have to get used to the routine. That's kind of throwing me off as an adjustment, because you may wake up, you don't know what day it is, what time it is, and you really have to deliberately remind yourself and say that, hey, and then of course I have my calls, which are scheduled calls, some are not. But I've always worked virtually, so that's actually not been a challenge, but just the physicality of not being in a meeting, like in person, like the number of coffees you would have drastically reduced. I have like two coffees now.
Yeah.
Like I have like about 10 coffees in a day otherwise.
Yeah.
So just the whole food intake, my sleep pattern is off. So I'm slowly now getting back and then deliberately saying no, only yeses, and limiting my screen time, because now
Yeah.
I'm 100% screen time,
Yeah.
which is crazy, which I thought like I need to cut back.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been an interesting challenge and a whole new paradigm on my lifestyle.
My big takeaway has been I find myself loading and unloading the dishwasher every day.
Hey, you have to create an activity.
It's like, what happened? Uh, so I think, for those of you that are joining us, we're going to get started now. Use the Q&A feature. I think we don't have a super prepared agenda that we have to kind of stick to. And this is as much for those of you that are tuning in as it is. We just don't want to be in the mode of talking at you, but we'll start chatting about a few things and then feel free to chime in. So can you give us like a brief background? I know your background pretty well, and those of us that are very busy doing interesting things, especially yourself, we do a terrible job of keeping our LinkedIn profile up to date.
Yeah, incredibly bad.
um, so give us, I think for people that have researched you, it might be hard to understand the gravity of some of the things that you've done. And I always get fascinated with your work at Singularity University, which those of you that don't know what that is, Google it real quick while we're on the Zoom. So give us just a brief background in terms of context.
Yeah, sure. I mean, my career has been like split into a couple of different industries. I worked way back. It just feels so long ago at this point, like a decade ago. I was in the financial services for a few years as an industry. So I was with GE Capital. I did management consulting in banking, and payments was my domain. In that process, I ended up working, even though it's a pure banking, ended up working on projects, tied to the federal government, like Freddie Mac, and then Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. Because when you're talking about money, there's so many aspects to money. And then ended up also working on some Sarbanes-Oxley compliance policy guidelines. So it's been like an interesting vantage point to have that a little more deeper understanding of the financial sector, and then how many touch points that sector has. But besides that, I also worked in the tech industry. To be very precise, I probably in my career had worked with about 3 startups. The most recent startup actually was right here in the Valley in 2017. It was an edtech AI company, and I headed their global partner ecosystem, where you had SoftBank as an investor, like Kapoor Capital as an investor. So you had like this classic Valley style startup, which is a Series B, Series C company, and it's a whole another understanding, and then getting up to speed on the skill base. So my background has always been like a little multidisciplinary. And then I'm not a coder, I'm not a programmer. I literally call myself these days a technologist. Again, the reason I define that is my last few years, in 2014, I did a program at Singularity University, which used to be based inside the NASA Moffett Field, research park, where Peter Diamandis and then Ray Kurzweil were these 2 amazing founders who really started like about 10, 11 years ago, started talking about this exponential curve, exponential mindset, abundance mindset. And it's completely this non-linear way of looking at things. And then really kind of predicting disruption, and saying that disruption is your only option. Like there's no other way, everything gets disrupted, and you got to disrupt yourself before you disrupt others. But instead of looking at a linear curve of how you're going to build companies, how you're going to solve problems, how do you take on and apply technologies? And these are not just, like applying Python, to kind of code something, but how do you even start creating AI, start looking at AI in a much more serious way? So this sort of exponential technologies that kind of converge at some point to kind of disrupt the very human evolution and how we do things. So it's like really kind of, and I totally bought into that. I mean, it was like very logical, it made sense. And then ever since, I've kind of shifted my focus and started being a mentor and advisor to, startups and tech companies, which are kind of looking at this exponential curve, which are trying to create this next wave, applying these exponential technologies. And that includes biotech, like nanotech, space technologies, 3D printing, artificial intelligence, and kind of a blockchain kind of comes into that foray. But the whole idea is these have the potential of scale, and these are the ones that actually would help disrupt and recreate industries, or new industries are born out of this. But most importantly, how do you apply this to solve some of the biggest challenges we have in the world? Like energy, food, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So it's really been fascinating. And I would say since 2014, I've really kind of pivoted myself into that foray of entrepreneurially, what can you do, but how do you apply this model? It's no longer a shortage thing, it's an abundance thing. So it's kind of had that mixed bag. So that's kind of my background in the long or short way, where this intersection of where science, technology comes in, but then how do you reapply that in an entrepreneurial environment, whether it's funded, non-funded, but then start kind of looking into the future and start coming back and building now for the future versus building now and then predicting. So it's like a creation mode coming back.
Yeah, and I love that you bring it. So I prescribe the book Abundance to so many people when I do talks. It's just, if you haven't gotten it, Abundance by Peter Diamandis. I also tell people, make your children read it. So I used to read that book to my kids when they were younger.
Yeah, fantastic.
They get to those weird tween ages where you want to spend time with them, and you're not going to read them like Aesop's fables, but me, I'm reading them Good to Great and Abundance. And I think Abundance is a great read if you have like tweenagers. It's very accessible, but I think just framing out a lot of the words like disruption and even innovation, and those words that, and giving it context, I think it's just a great book, and it's just a great read for people. So highly recommend that. We haven't announced it formally just because we've been pretty quiet just because I don't know, there's bigger things to talk about than ourselves these days. But we added you to our strategic advisory council a couple weeks ago, which was interesting because we've known each other for a long time, and we are very deliberate, as startups should be. We think of ourselves as a startup. How you formulate your board and how you think about your board is probably one of the most strategic things you can do. And we joke around, it's called Strategic Advisory Council. It's not just a made up thing. And, we have Craig Dietelwig, who's a big real estate mogul in New York. We have Brendan Huffman, who runs Rubenstein Partners out of Philly, another real estate person. We have my good friend Bob Vanek in LA, who's a serial entrepreneur, wild man, like rebooted the XFL, like just all kinds of very like classic LA kind of guy. Even though he grew up in Connecticut, he's a classic guy. So he kind of gives us that bent. We have Brian McGowan, who runs Greater Seattle Partners, who basically has a coalition of all the top CEOs in Seattle. So he gives us that inroads into Amazon and Microsoft, like that whole world. And he worked for President Obama, and just super connected person. Kaufman Fellow, Brookings Institute kind of thing. So we're just mapping this all out. And I was like, we need someone that's not exactly from the industry, right? We need someone that's going to kind of challenge our startups, because I think in the world of venture, if you have a business model that drives exponential scale, VC hat on, it hopefully drives exponential returns on the fund side. And so we thought we were talking about, we need someone that's going to spark a little bit more different thinking around these. And I think we started talking when you got back from Davos, because I think, interesting enough, I mean, Davos feels like so far away,
Oh my gosh,
like a year away, but it's been like months. And really, we're talking coming out of Davos that climate change was the topic. I mean, that was the topic. BlackRock, everybody's committing towards climate change. And that feels like a year ago.
Yeah.
But it's not. So after that, I was like, no, she gets it. She's focused on what we're focused on in terms of thinking about climate and sustainability. And then, of course, COVID happens. And I've had popular, unpopular, it's facts, right? I'm a little bit of an engineer. I report the facts without trying to add too much color commentary. But, the facts say that there's less pollution in China. Mm-hmm. Water quality is better. That in many ways we may be the problem. We are the problem to climate change. And since we've all been put in time out for a minute, that the earth is kind of showing. I have a friend in Seattle that says he's seen more bald eagles than ever before. Yeah. It's just little things. There's coyotes on the streets of San Francisco.
I know. It has to go viral, right? It's crazy. But
is the earth course correcting? Is this a bigger thing happening? We've been destroying this planet for so many years that now it's fighting back. I mean, what do you think?
I think, January literally feels like eternity, but I'm realizing that literally what is exponential, right? So what we define as one day now feels like one day is like a 1 year equivalent in terms of the movement. And definitely, I think one thing, coronavirus is the virus itself is not new, but the new iteration, the new strain, the COVID-19, literally overnight changed everything at the planetary scale. So this is exactly where the exponential part hits in, right? Things can happen overnight. And the scale and the magnitude, we have to accept that we're really kind of switching from this known world we can manage, we can control, to this unknown, and they have no control over it. And all we are fended to do is we have to fend and move with the same pace as the virus is doing right now, and then literally react. We don't have the time to plan, respond. That means you have to be quick on the feet and then literally course correct. And I totally agree with you. It's almost like all humans have been given timeout. It's go sit in your room, that's it. Like, and we're literally in a freaking room, and then we can't do anything else, and we can't step out. And yes, the air is clear. Like sometimes when I do take a walk in like this total isolation and like no crowd, not like in, forget about 6 feet, like 20 feet maintaining distance, the air is fresh. And I think in Venice canals, like, the sea life has come back, which is kind of really crazy. And the water has been cleared. And it really kind of, yes, while these companies like in Davos have been committed, like large capitals, again, some say it's a lip service, some say like the fact is they've acknowledged that climate is an important issue, like more verbally, unanimously by the top leaders of the world. Then the question now is, do they accept that pandemic is one of those criteria? Climate will only now going forward exacerbate the situation that we're in. So this, I don't think we're the first and the last pandemics of our lifetime. There'll be many more such unknown strains of bacteria, unknown strains of viruses that are getting thawed because the climate, the Arctic and Antarctic circle is melting. That means a lot of these dormant viruses is going to come back, and we have no idea what those viruses are. So pandemics may not be at the global scale, but this situation where we don't have vaccines, we don't have viral drugs, we don't understand, we don't have immunity, how do we even react going forward to that? And this is kind of like a wake-up call, both at the personal level, at the hygiene level, government level, and a response to these kind of extreme situations. Because climate has been always in that bucket of this extreme situation, earthquakes, tsunamis, like we have this erratic, non-linear behavior of patterns we've never seen before. The scale we've never seen before, the magnitude we've never seen before. And we were just getting started on the climate side. And that's where like the scientists and researchers have been constantly screaming, saying that, hey, we have a decade to fix ourselves. We have a decade to do something about it. But now I think we have to like do a fast track. I think for a moment, we are not talking about climate. And even though it's only 2 months ago, when everyone started focusing, the time of the need definitely is COVID, and anything and everything we have to figure out in the next 18 months. We're not talking about next week, 2 weeks. We have to prepare for the next 18 months to 2 years of the whole world may go upside down, right? We don't know how we're going to come out of this. We don't know. We're beginning to project numbers, death rate, but we have no idea what the job situation is, in the employment situation, the funding situation is. There's so many of these unknown variables that we've not calculated. Now we have to like very quickly react to it and pivot. And then will these startups even manage to get through? We don't know. Quite a few may not even make it through, right? Yeah. Forget about the human life, the other side of the business. And then I think we have to take climate into the equation going forward in our preparedness of the future in every single contingency plan. So yeah, it just feels like eternity, like January. And that probably was my last big crowds, like in these close quarters I've been.
Yeah.
It feels like a dream. I can't wait to get back. I don't know when. Yeah. So it's a whole another massive tectonic shift.
Yeah. So we have a question. I'm going to make one comment, then we have a question because I do want to answer questions along the way. One of the things that my phone has been ringing off the hook with startups, right? And I try to explain to them, we're fortunate. We have a fresh fund and we have really limited to no portfolio to do damage control. So we're not living in the negative space psychologically like a lot of VCs are. But, when I talk to my VC friends, we keep reserves, maybe it's for every $3 we deploy, we keep $1, or for every, there's ratios we all look at. Which means basically if you're a startup and you're going to go back to your current investors, you're competing with the rest of their portfolio, right? No one does a one-to-one reserve. That just doesn't happen. So in many ways, we have to pick who wins and who doesn't win, right? Kind of going forward. And part of that has been, post 9/11, when I've been doing this for a while, post 9/11, a lot of startups that really did not have product market fit were, as an entrepreneur, you got to pass, right? Oh, well, whoever anticipated 9/11, my company got shut down because of 9/11. And when you went to go do your next endeavor, it was a perfectly kind of good excuse, a valid excuse, but still an excuse, right? And then every other business model post 9/11 had the idea of terrorist events, contingencies around that. Pandemic has not been on the list. It's now on the list, right? And it's funny, I was talking to one of our advisors, and he said, yeah, it's funny, the New York firms all have backup facilities in Connecticut
Mm-hmm.
because of post 9/11. So a lot of the trading people have actually just gone to the Connecticut office. So it's like, this is like a net new factor when we see your deck and it says risk factors, like this is a net new one, right? So, but the question was, what do we foresee? This is from John Frangella. What do you guys foresee the future of the economy? What's the ripple effect for the next 3 years from now? You know, I'm short Delta, I'm long REI. That's my point of view right now. But what do you think?
um, 3 years seems to be very hard to model right now because uh, several industries, we're not looking at the cascading effect of what a total global shutdown on supply chains is going to do, right? I mean, right now we're literally in that global supply chain shutdown. That means goods are not moving, things are not getting made, they're not traveling very far. There's trade situations where like trade wars are happening between countries, and everyone's gone into like this reserve mode, like a bunker mode in a way, at least for the short term. And of course, we've seen the markets like really come down hard, as the COVID was unfolding in China. We've literally seen its impact directly on markets, whether it's Dow Jones, whether it's S&P. We had about like more than $1 trillion, I think more than like $3 to $4 trillion wiped out from the markets, like literally overnight. But the question is, will these traditional industries come back the same way? Will they even last? Some of these companies, even some of the largest companies, will they be able to survive this immediate crisis we're talking about as the COVID-19, come out in a way without massive downsizing, massive like diluting their companies in terms of their market share, massive in terms of the number of customers lost and win. So even the other day I was hearing the Marriott CEOs. I think it's one of those really great addresses that he made to his company wide and in a virtual environment like Zoom. I don't think he would have ever done that before, but it was an extremely sobering take. Like he literally is projecting more closures of many locations. So I think there's a lot of the dislocation of existing assets, downsizing, shrinkage. So it's going to be like this. I don't think we would go back to the same kind of markers that we saw. So 3 years seems like very far to predict with even any amount of accuracy at this point. All we have to say is like what's going to happen in the next 2 months, 3 months, and how much of these reserves these companies have, whether it's a big company, which is a public listed company, or even a medium-sized company. A lot of the mom and pop stores are going to suffer in this process. So what is the ripple effect of that? The unemployment rate we're looking at already right now, I mean, in the US, the projections are really crazy. It feels like this can't be America, not the America that I remember even like thinking about growing up or coming here to this country a couple of decades ago. But the numbers are like 20% unemployment, 30% unemployment. So there is this whole massive talent that's coming onto the market. Easy to find talent, I think, in that situation. But what will we build in the next 2 years? Like, what will we hold on to? What will we let go? So it just seems a little bleak. I'd rather be like more radically realistic. I think we need to be clinically realistic and prepare for that worst case scenario and not even look at optimistic, but what can we do to kind of get on to the other side? I think right now there's a bit of the survival mode. Anyone who has a cushion to survive 2 years, I think they probably have an interesting opportunity, but even big companies are pivoting as to what they will do, what they won't do right now. So 3 years for me feels a little harder to kind of sitting where we are today in March, end of the March, and looking into the crystal ball into the future. I think we can probably look at some known variables and then continue to push forward, but we don't know what other unknown variables are going to come hit us. And it's going to be across the board. All the stock markets, I mean, the fact that we've stopped trading, that is like historic. Like 1 hour stopping is different. We're talking about a full day of no trading. And I think the markets are wiping its value. Like many companies' value is getting wiped out. Literally, like we see the charts following. And it seems a bit daunting, but I think who is going to emerge are going to be the very successful ones. I mean, it really helps to kind of skim a lot of the wastage, skim a lot of the inefficiencies, rethink and pivots. Because when you think about Airbnb, when was it born? Like when you think about some of these amazing companies, like PayPal was born right at the heels of the dot-com bust, right? So it's a brand new opportunity for some of these companies to like rethink, reinvent, repivot to, and then if they can make it, I think they're going to be very, very successful.
Yeah, and I think I try to remind people the economy and the stock market are not the same thing. And I do think what's happening is these business models, like I've been very critical being in Atlanta. I am hypercritical of everything Delta does because I just think they do some things very terribly. And I think these business models that are dependent on high volume, low margin, high utilization are in many ways kind of broken. And I think there's certain business models that have been hanging on. And something like this has created, it's become a catalyst. I think I invested in, I invest across industries. Our fund is focused on built environment, but I personally kind of invest in whatever. And there's certain things the bell will not get in wrong. Telemedicine is one of them. I invested in telemedicine 8 years ago, something like that. And the biggest hurdle was never about technology. It was never about it was none of those things. There were no technical barriers. It was all pure regulatory. Right. And you look at what happened now, and they basically said, okay, for the time being, we're going to let everything happen. I don't know how because big industries have lobbyists. We know what the system is, whether we like it or not. The system is the system. All of a sudden, they took away all those barriers. And it's no longer you can only do telemedicine with a physician in your state. Now it's across states, right? Yep. I don't think they turned that around. I think things like, real estate agents, which I've been very critical of. I'm not sure why I'm paying 6% for someone to walk me around a house. Some of those models start to get broken. Even Marriott has been, they've been struggling, period, right? This is not a net new struggle with the likes of an Airbnb and some of the other more disruptive models. So to me, it's just accelerating some of the disruption in models that really were hanging on by a thread. Funny enough, I'll let you get your 2 cents in. In 1998, Cisco was an investor in one of my companies, and I got to see Cisco telepresence. And my first reaction was short all the airlines, because why would I ever get on a plane if I can do this, right? And there's a great book by Harry Dent called Roaring 2000s that he published in 1999 that talks about all these things, right? Yeah. But we went through 9/11 and somehow we went back into our old behavior and not leveraging technology. And now all of a sudden, for me and you doing Zoom calls and virtual, that's like just every day. But I've been shocked by how many people have said, oh my gosh, like why would I ever go back into the office? So maybe it is time, right? Maybe we have too much airline capacity and we're spending too much time on planes.
But at the same time, what's really interesting is, yes, I think a lot of these, the models, the business models that were built, and that whether it could be a hospitality industry is one of those ripe ones anyway. These are old models, regardless. I mean, they're brick and mortar based, old models. They don't understand the digital world and what it means to operate in a digital, fast moving world. But I think one thing that I'll look at right now very seriously is supply chain. Where is the invention happening in supply chains? Because everything is about moving. There are 3 things, right? When you think about economy, these 3 things are important. How do we move people? How do we move money? How do we move goods and services? And everything comes right there, right? Are we still moving? Are we localizing it? Are we depending on centralized supply chain systems? And I think one thing COVID has actually brought to the fore is the dependency the world had, the global supply chain dependency we had on China, and exactly what we saw when China shut down, massive ripple effects all over the world. And I think right now we're going to see this now where companies would rethink about their dependency on one country, one product, one place. How are we going to manage that going forward? Because it's too much for us to have reliance just like we saw in 2008 financial crisis, if you were too tied to the US dollar, and if there's no decoupling, if something like that happens, the whole world is affected at the same time. I think right now I'm keep looking, going back to how do we redefine our global supply chain system? Because China has been the epicenter of all of that in the last decade. We depended heavily on China. When China decided to shut down, boom, done, nothing is coming. We are scrambling for even the basic essentials, which makes no sense. I don't think it's a problem with capacity. It is a problem with having the manufacturing ability. It's reliance on that single centralized player, that where everything came from that. So I think we're going to relook at whether, it's a Delta Airlines, like what's your supply chain is going to look at, what are logistics going to look like. If, of course, in the Airbnb world where we have a lot of underutilized assets that actually got utilized, I don't no longer need the central brick and mortar buildings where I have to go stay in a hotel. So I totally agree with you. They're like this tail end of some of these companies, which could include Fortune 500 companies, already are going to get obsolete regardless. The relevance is getting minimal and minimal. That means new models are going to emerge. This is their opportunity. If they really want to like revamp their business, this is their opportunity. And COVID really presented that for them to rethink. It's like we have to like look at every single business assumption that we've actually had across the board, whether it's your operations, your engineering, your marketing, your sales, your supply chain, your product, everything, every single assumption on the business side, we have to rethink right now. And saying that what makes sense, if not, get rid of it, get rid of it, get rid of it. So there's a bit of that preserve capital, but any kind of a crisis, three things will continue to do really well, right? Food and medicine will always do well. They're essentials, essentials, essentials. I think grocery chains can't keep up with the demand right now, even with masks, wearing everything, because no matter what, we have to still eat. We have to take care of our physical health. I think ammunition is one of those. The defense actually gets stronger and stronger in these kind of situations. So I think a big uptick right now we're going to see, at least in one industry, is healthcare. And now FDA, the regulatory bodies are a lot more open to relax some of their old school methods, right?
Yeah.
So we may have fast drug approvals, we may apply technologies to actually look at drug discoveries. And pharma, the big pharma will rethink about how they would even create a drug going forward. Mm-hmm. It's not about investing $2 billion and waiting 10 years and doing a patent method. They may do a little more open source approach, for example. So healthcare industry, I think, is definitely primarily positioned for that. Hopefully they will leverage that. And essential food supplies, I think FMCG kind of a category, I think maybe another industry that can be doing kind of very well, perishable, non-perishable, because we would need the essentials no matter what happens.
Yeah, but it's funny,
I think probably have to wait for a bit.
Yeah. I think, one of our investments had to run it for a while, company that we made robots that made clothes. Mm-hmm. And it was like a no-brainer, like, okay, you can have a robot that makes clothes cheaper than offshoring. And what we learned in that process was, in America, no one knows actually how to make anything.
Correct.
Right? So Nike actually knows how to make shoes, because back in the day, they had to make their own shoes. Under Armour and Lululemon have no idea how things are made. They are design and marketing organizations and brand organizations. And if there was zero talent, all the talent that knew how to make clothes was either dead or retired.
Yep.
And that we've actually pushed a lot of the supply chain knowledge. I mean, it's just so hard to find people that have deep experience in making anything. So I think that's going to be, we saw that in the apparel industry, mm-hmm. that nobody knows how to make anything. It's all done overseas. And when I had to go to China to learn how to make things, really. So that'll be interesting. We have a question. If you were the CEO of Delta, what would you do differently to adapt to the business, given a highly regulated, safety critical business with extremely high fixed costs, planes, fuel, et cetera, and a highly competitive landscape? Because I don't have real hobbies, I spend a lot of time on Twitter, and I tweeted something about the airlines should be nationalized. Because if they're too big to fail and we're going to continually bail them out every 15 to 20 years, mm-hmm. there's a pattern there that I don't understand at this point. Why don't we just nationalize the airline industry? Because we pretty much are the safety net for the downside and we get none of the upside.
Mhm.
Um, my personal opinion. But and of course, all my friends went nuts, thinking, "How dare you?" You know. What do you think? Like, if you were the CEO of Delta, if Ed called you up tomorrow and said, "Hey, what do you think?"
I'm
What are
glad I'm
your
not the
what
CEO
would
of
your
Delta right
coaching
now.
be?
It's probably a hard position to be a CEO of Delta right now. It's probably a massive on so many levels, right? Because pandemics is a death trap being in a compressed environment of a plane. It's like the worst environment you want to be in a pandemic time. And I think uh, transportation in general, I think I'm looking at like, long range distance travel, short range distance travel. I think this is actually another opportune time. If I was CEO of Delta or like anyone at the helm of this large, highly capital intensive, expensive business models, because they have a lot of total upfront costs, right? They can't get away from planes, maintenance. And this is not something I can even do ride share on, right? There were some interesting models that actually came out in the last few years, like in this low cost, small airports, like cutting through the lines and forget about the commercial. But I think there's an opportunity for private air travel to emerge, which much more controlled environments where you kind of know your members versus your passengers where you don't have any relationship with. I think it's time to also rethink as to what air travel is going to look like. And also the fact that, on the space side of activity is something that we can start learning. I know Elon Musk has always been pushing the total disruption of the transportation industries. Hyperloop maybe will take off, of course, provided the technology works and then that we make the science work. These are like prime cases, like sonic fast travel, because we don't need 10 hours to go from place to place anymore, especially when the planet is so small, technically speaking. If you can travel into space, how do we reapply? And this is, I think, where any top leader, top CEO has to really, 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 really seriously take advantage of this downtime. In their case, literally this halted time to reassess every single aspect of, hey, if I were to recreate future of travel, future of air, how would I do it? Yes, I may have to struggle. I may have to figure out a way how to come out of this in the next. What if I have zero travel, even if markets open up? People will be extremely hesitant to travel now. I don't think I'll probably board a plane. If I do, I'm going to take 101 precautions
Mhm.
because for the next 18 months, COVID is not going away. We may have another lapse of that coming in fall and winter, right? I mean, we're hoping some of the antiviral drugs are going to work, but we may not have a vaccine ready by then. That means there could be other bouts we should be prepared for. And it doesn't matter whether it's China, United States, India, or African continent. I think the whole world will continue to mentally operate like we are in a lockdown mode. That means unless they're bailed out, what is their other option? Is there an opportunity for them to re-emerge into a new business model altogether and disrupt themselves? I think this has given them a great opportunity to like, you know what? Earlier they could not stop to actually disrupt anything. Now they have all the time to disrupt themselves. If they were to do, how will they do it? Rethink about every aspect of what air travel is going to look like. And then if Virgin Galactic is going to step in, can we reapply some of those planes to low altitude flying, for example? We have like passenger cars, which are autonomous vehicles. I think all of this would lend to this non-human touch point of mobility. And then where does that air fit into that equation? Can we really kind of give or invest, like some of these airlines, can the Delta CEO invest in, like Uber has been experimenting with this flying car, single two-pod
Mhm.
mechanisms where they're completely autonomous. I don't need these large planes. So do we really need to hoard like 500 people at the same time going forward?
Yeah, yeah. And
Do we,
I think
all of that has to be rethought, right?
yeah, yeah. And I think also there's a fundamental thing that is unpopular, um, that I think is facts, right? We have too much capacity, and air flying is too cheap.
Yeah.
I should not be able to fly to LA for 238 round trip. That's absurd. I don't think there's anything wrong with taking some capacity out of the system and raising prices. God forbid. I mean, I think this idea of low cost airline, it's kind of like everything consumerism in this country.
Mhm.
Same reason why, oh, it turns out $5 t-shirts are bad for the environment. Like, of course, $5 t-shirts are bad for the environment. T-shirts should be $50, only buy four. You don't need 100 t-shirts, right, that don't last. So I think near term wise,
challenge that assumption of a pricing. Of course, you can do pricing innovation, right? But what if you were to rethink and say, hey, all air travel going forward is going to be free? How can I make that happen? This is where the abundance thinking concept that I want to bring in is like, hey, we can do incremental innovation on the process side, make things better and better, but we have to continue to build for democratization of price anyway, right? I mean, you look at that in the energy industry. We are looking at like, hey, it's not about reallocating and redistributing in the short term, maybe you will do that, but if I were to fundamentally rethink this, is there a way I can create a model where all air travel is going to be free and I can make money through many other mechanisms? That's a brand new way. And that's a membership model, right? That's exactly what Netflix has done. That's exactly what Spotify has done. I no longer have to pay for every single thing and then do this. Oh, this track is more popular. I'm going to charge you $5. It's like, screw it. Like content is commodity, which is going to have like this really kind of a membership, super low price point and eventually free price point. Like, you can't really beat it free at the end of the day. So either you can have this very premium luxury segment, or you can have like this massive democratization of pricing going forward. And then what does that model is going to look like as a business, right? And can you reinvent the very concept of, instead of only hedging on the pricing side, hedging only on governments constantly saving you, would you have an opportunity to kind of rethink and say, you know what, I know there's going to be volume. So when I have a dedicated volume of passengers, no matter where, pandemic, no pandemic, once they come out of it, we can guarantee they're going to move around, because human tendency, we can't be bottled and be confined for a long time. That means how do I capitalize on this eager, super avid travelers and then provide another tier? It's almost kind of, we have to rethink on, can we go now from a commodity pricing to free pricing? And what does that model is going to look like? We got to like do a bunch of scenarios on that. It's better to start simulating now on this abundance model of air travel is going to look like. Because Elon Musk is probably going to do it at some point anyway. If he's willing to take us for like $250,000 going to space, no reason he's not going to apply that to our low range travel. Like Uber is already looking at, very interesting, because they're already investing in autonomous vehicles and autonomous flying cars, autonomous cars, and there's modules that's going to go around. The goal is like, hey, for $2, I can go from San Francisco to San Jose. Nothing can beat that. If you can go to Seattle for $2, and because bet on the volume, but it's a new way to bet on the volume, right?
Yeah.
So I think there, again, from a pure brainstorming standpoint, we got to like really bring in this exponentiality very seriously, and then the abundance model, because I don't think we would get this opportunity again in the near term to massively rethink what air travel is going to look like. Yeah. That's what I would do as a CEO of any airline right now.
Yeah.
And hopefully you'll get the bailout and you'll survive this pandemic, and we'll see how that goes.
Yeah. I struggle with the bailout. We're making small businesses loans and we're giving Delta a grant. I like struggle with that. So Walter Yeager's had a couple of questions here, and I'll paraphrase a few. His first question was, given where we are with unemployment and mass layoffs, and interesting, the mass layoffs have kind of, there's been, you look at the Marriotts of the world, but you look at the middle market, there's just not enough news cycles to, I mean, I know some companies personally, the CEOs have laid off 60, 70% of their company overnight, right? So the question was, do Fortune 500s have an obligation to pivot and make goods that will help during the pandemic? And then a second question was, for smaller disruptors, what opportunities could this be for them, kind of specific to healthcare? I think we hit that a little bit.
Yep.
Do you have to be big pharma to get a drug out,
No.
Anymore?
This is where we can bring in AI, like with Watson. I know IBM introduced that in a much more mainstream way of how can I apply AI for drug discovery, right? I mean, there's another good friend of mine who's the founder of you can call them healthcare company there. He was involved in longevity, but now pivoted towards more around drug discovery. So they actually literally apply AI. They have their own full-blown AI that actually gets really getting utilized in the AI. And they have like big partnerships with a lot of the big pharma companies, both in Asia as well as in the United States. and in Europe, where this is exactly where we can start begin to take advantage of AI. It's like the discovery process doesn't have to be human driven. How can we augment that human talent, the human science approach, and then massively apply AI to the drug discovery aspect? And of course, AI can now go into like the diagnostics and pre-diagnostic side, for example. Tele is one way as a medium, as an interface, but in terms of cutting down the timeline from the time when you think you may have a potential drug to, it's been a pretty long cycle. That's how big pharma operated, right? 2 years, sometimes 5 years, and shooting in the dark still. You have no predictive patterns on whether I will actually hit the drug. I mean, the $3 billion, but I have no idea where it's going to go. It completely may go bust, which is what gave them this exclusive opportunity to kind of patent and hold that drug for about a decade. It was not useful for general population. You could not actually scale. The whole US drug pricing is really insane, right? We don't have universal healthcare. Really kind of people go bankrupt in some situations if they have health conditions. But I think now, what if you can decrease the drug discovery process itself? What if we can literally every week we are like spitting out drug discoveries and only some are viable to go to market, which is totally fine. That just reducing that time frame is really where we can bring in some of these technologies, right? Let's augment the human talent, at least in the near term, but start really applying this in our entire process of end-to-end value chain of drug creation on the chemical compounds. Of course, now we combine that with also the biotech evolution that's happening, right? Where I'm no longer only relying on a chemical compound as a treatment. What if I can start using CRISPR fix at the protein level?
Yeah.
Because right now SARS is an RNA sequence virus, right? It's not a DNA sequence virus.
Right.
But what if we had better understanding of our DNA sequencing and then start predicting the RNA patterns, and RNA then can be applied once we know how to understand that, can go into humans as well as into agriculture. So these applications of this biotechnology can be cross-industry. And that's exactly what China has actually been doing that for a while. They do a lot of, what we spray now, how we grow our food in agriculture, ag tech setting, by literally eliminating disease before the disease is born is a great way to actually ensure your yield is perfect. We have no wastage. Instead of like, things dying and then us using chemicals and pesticides, what if we can fix the RNA part of that and then reuse it, right? I mean, then our crop is wonderful, So there is this aspect of drug discovery, healthcare, how do we even manufacture and bringing that localized manufacturing back. So instead of me hoarding inventory, which was a global supply chain model, what if it's only based on what I need, how I need on demand, and kind of do an autonomous way of actually looking at it? All of these are actually viable right now. It seemed like impossible like 5-10 years ago, but now the tools are only getting better and better. That means we can cut down on the time scale, cut down on the cost factor, and then look at fast output and then fast testing at the same time. I don't think we've ever developed a vaccine in 60 days that went into human trials. We just did that for COVID-19, right? The first human trial, of course, we skipped the entire animal trial process, but we got to do what we have to do to save lives.
Yeah, and I think it's
going to be useful, and how are we going to do it in the future?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, as an entrepreneur, I've always stayed away. I mean, I've done health tech because that's more, you don't have to deal with the FDA. But I do think if those of you that have not looked up CRISPR and understand what that is, I mean, I would almost gather like maybe I go start, is the next wave? I think big pharma is dead in many ways between the opioid crisis and all the stuff that they did terribly in handling that, and just how hard the court system justifiably has come down on them. Like, I think just like we think about building IT type tech startups in our garage, so to speak, like there could be this amazing wave of, biotech and pharma tech startups in their basements, right? If you look at what you can get online to do CRISPR type stuff, it's pretty wild, a little scary, but the whole point has been like, that's all experimental. You'll never get it to market. With this, if the FDA starts to rethink how they do stuff and people start applying kind of AI stuff, it's interesting. I run a postdoc program between Georgia Tech and Emory, and it's all like PhDs in biology. And what I learned running that program, a PhD in biology, chemistry, any of that today, they're data scientists.
Oh,
Like,
totally.
they're not really looking through microscopes and like or chemistry, like beakers and like what we think about chemistry and biology. They're all like just big data nerds nowadays, right? And applying it. So I think there's some, I hope there will be a renaissance of innovation in healthcare, like true, like transformative. I have a friend that runs a personalized cancer therapy company. He's been at it for 10 years, surviving on grant money, literally started it in his garage kind of thing. I'm hoping that his company gets to actually take off because he's doing amazing things and he's not trying to battle the multi-billion-dollar pharma.
One thing you have to remember is like, to be in healthcare, you don't have to be from healthcare. That is the whole concept, right? JP Morgan Chase, it's a bank. It's like one of the most highly regulated big banks, right? They're into healthcare. Amazon is into healthcare. Google is into healthcare. These are search engine companies. Like, I mean, the way we knew Google has been, of course, Google is so much more because Alphabet now has Verily that's purely focused on the pure biotech side of and longevity stuff, and really kind of focusing on how do we even identify disease and eliminate disease. So it's almost like we are engineering things, right? I think this whole mindset of bringing the engineering mindset, regardless of what we do going forward, whether it's engineering airline industry, how do we re-engineer these industries? And almost kind of wearing that hat first, it's not the wearing a business hat first, because business is going to evolve anyway. And that's exactly where data patterns, to the extent possible, where can we apply algorithms? How can we leverage, even if we're not completely getting replaced, we have to leverage these technologies to whatever form or fashion so we can augment our own process. And let's take even COVID as an example. Yes, right now we're looking at, hey, we're going to be hit with this one way or another. We want to slow the spread so that we're not overburdening our hospital capacity systems, so that way we all have a chance of survival. But at the same time, there's a very serious conversation that, because I've been part of a couple of them here, is going forward, how do we augment our own immunity? Like, forget about it. I'm drinking my turmerics and gingers every single day, like loading up on my immune boosters. It's like, you got to do what you have to do. But I think it's going to be here to stay, right? Immunity, yes, I can fix everything around me, but I also have to start fixing myself in a brand new way. So that way, if more of these come, I have a certain level of immunity to kind of handle these things, right? So the same thing is like, we have big companies and old companies and these old business models, we have an immune problem there, right? How do we attack that immune systems? So how do they augment their immune systems going forward? And what does it include? Does it include the business side, the engineering side, the product side, the market side, or where they're very simple relevancy? Because your competition is no longer from your industry. Your competition literally can come from any different direction. A big tech company becomes your next big grocery chain. And the next big grocery chain becomes your next big healthcare company. And they'll become your biggest insurance company, for example. Yeah. They also own real estate, and they'll also become your real estate company. So there's this massive free flow of assets. And then how do you reallocate your assets? How do you dislocate your assets? And how do you reinvent, assuming that your competition is anything and everything around you? Yeah. Not just looking at your industry silos.
So we've got about 4 minutes left. I wanted to make one comment just generally. So at Shadow Ventures, we do these webinar events. They're open to the public, so to speak. We do run an entire Slack community. It's about 600 people these days and growing. We don't charge anything to be part of it. What's kind of cool is Anitha's part of it. So while you guys maybe, I always say like sometimes people are shy about Q&A. There's a lot of lurkers these days. People, so be sure if you're not already a member of our community if you want to continue conversations with Anitha or whoever else we have on, everybody's in the community. So you kind of have direct access on an ongoing basis, which is, I'm sure she's busy, but I think we're all pretty active in Slack. So be sure to do that. And, I think the last thing, I'd written an article a few weeks ago about not being a victim of the new norm. but
Mm-hmm.
rather understanding that we all have a role in shaping the new norm.
Mm-hmm.
How would you feel like, how do you feel like I mean, part of that's your own reality, right? Of shaping your new norm. How do you think you're going to change kind of your personal new norm based on this experience? You know, I mean, clearly we're still experiencing, it's not over. I mean, do you think there's things that your new norm is going to be, you're going to shape very differently based on this experience?
I think I'm beginning to, I'm being a little hesitant to using that new norm because normal is always changing. Like somehow we decide like this is my only normal that will never change in my entire lifetime. I think that's a myth, right? I mean, we've always been changing at a micro scale and we've never not even taken notice of that. Somehow we thought like we've always been the same, but no, we have not been all the same. We've always, because the only thing that's constant is change, 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 change. But in this time around, it's exponential change, which is becoming the new normal. I think that's the fundamental difference is, in my case, I think it is one of the best opportunities I have time to create, right? I think it's a great time to go back into the drawing board and then everyone should become a creator right now because that's the only way we have a chance to deliberately architect what we will do, how we will do it coming out of this. And again, coming out of this seems like so far away right now to even think. We don't know what that coming out is going to look like. But the fact is, how do we become super adaptable and agile at every single level going forward? And whether it be running my startup and the way I'm going to plan for my fundraising or the way I'm going to build my product, how do we literally build in that agility in every part of the equation going forward? And that includes my lifestyle, the way I would live, relationships I'm going to have. And of course, some things you have to react, but we do have a chance to be a little more responding to this approach, right? This whole thing about what really existed in the entire planet for millennium cockroaches. They survived. How do we become our own cockroaches? Like, can we make it? Can we survive no matter what is thrown at you? Like, how do we adapt to that cockroach mentality? What does that cockroach have that we can totally now utilize as the analogy? Because cockroaches survived tsunamis, survived earthquakes, survived any kind of big calamities, and they're around. And they're only populating. Like, they're not dying. We're trying to figure out, they become totally resistant to anything that's on this planet. How do we become that cockroach? And then what does it take? The resiliency, like what are the resiliency systems that we want to build in our personal lifestyles, our own financial, prudence to our dependencies, and what does that look like? I think it's a time to kind of apply that systems thinking, which is exactly what I'm trying to do is like, what are my systems that I got to start putting in place? Hopefully I'll survive this in many mechanisms. I think we're all susceptible to this one way or another on many different levels, economically, spiritually, financially, emotionally. I think most importantly, I think we're going to probably see a spike in divorces after this, spike in number of breakups after this, or more babies are born after this because we have the time. So we're creating we are this new generation. They call it the corona tweens, or like quarantines is like the new term. Quarantine, the corona babies, like so many things are going around. I think pandemics is one of those, and climate is not gone away. It's still there, coming on our heels. So that means we just have to get used to this exponential mode of constantly reacting to completely unforeseen situations, unknown variables, and start thinking everything a little more on the exponential scale, but operating as if like today is my last day, at least for the next 2 years. Like today is my last day. This is my last dime I'm going to spend. How will I spend it? Capital and cash flow has become really critical if you're a startup right now. The ones who've cushioned for 2 years, hats off to you, but I think most of them are not done that. And no funding is coming to play, so.
Anitha, we're out of time today. And like I said, if you're already a member of our community, she's hanging out in Slack all the time.
That's when you know.
If you're not joining the community, we don't charge anything for it. We just want to make sure there's the right balance of weirdos in it. So we just try to keep it a little bit curated. So thank you so much. Thanks for getting up early, and we'll talk to you later.
Talk to you later. It was great chatting. Thanks, everyone. Bye.